Okay, so in this video we're going to start looking at how computer programs deal with data. How a program works is it manipulates data through user inputs and mathematical calculations. Right? So it kind of gets information from the user, stores that information in its memory. We access that information through the use of variables in our programs. We manipulate that data with mathematics or control structures, and we then spit out data back to the screen, and kind of that repeats itself over and over and over again until your program kind of finishes executing what you want it to do. Okay, so this lesson's all about variables, okay, and different types of data that computers can store, right? So basically there are integers, okay, so positive and negative whole numbers, floating point values, which we know as decimal numbers. There are strings, which we talked about in the last lesson. So those are just characters or words or full sentences. So just sets of characters joined together. And there are also variables called Boolean or data types called Boolean values. Okay, so they are just strictly true or false. So that's using those will be for the next unit, but you can probably see how those might be useful, because when dealing with binary numbers and turning switches on and off inside the transistors in the computer, true would represent kind of like a 1 or an on state, and false would be like a 0 or off state. Okay, so those are important in order for us to deal with logic in a computer system. So when data comes in from the user, it has to be stored in memory somehow, but we don't want to, and it would be way too complicated to try to access that location directly, right? Like we'll let the programming language, because it's a high-level language, kind of figure out where it wants to put that data when it comes in. Because we don't want to start messing around with memory addresses. So in order to actually get the data, we have to store it. We store it in a variable, and that variable kind of points to where the data is going to be stored in memory. Okay, so we access that data using the variable name, just like you would in math. Okay, so you can just use a word, or you can use a letter to represent a piece of data. Okay. Now, there are some rules that you need to follow when naming variables. And they're not like necessarily, and some of them are enforced, some of them are just kind of best practice. But in this course, I would prefer that all variables start with a lowercase letter. You cannot use spaces if you have multiple words. That will not work. So if you want to use like kind of a multi-word variable, you either need to use underscores to separate the words, so they're still attached, or I use something called camel case naming, which is each word after the first word is capitalized. Okay. You cannot start a variable name with a number, okay, but you can have a number in the name, just can't start with it. And you should use meaningful names to represent the data you're storing, so you know what the heck is going on when you're writing the program, or somebody reading your program understands what you're doing. Okay, and variables are considered case sensitive. So if you have one variable, say name, and another variable called name, okay, those are considered different variables. So that's something to watch out for when you're typing, that you have made sure that you're always using the uppercase letters at the same location all the time. Okay, so in programming, it's pretty easy to assign values to variables. We'll deal with the user input in the next video, but all you have to do to assign a value to a variable in Python is just to write the variable name that you're wanting to use, an equal sign, and then the value that you want to store. So if you had the variable number and you wanted to assign the value of 27 to it, you would just write number equals 27. Okay. So how programming works is on the left-hand side of the equal sign is always a single variable, and on the right-hand side is what you're doing with that variable. So just something like this is just storing a value in a variable. Okay, if you wanted to store, say, the interest rate of a loan in the variable, same thing. Okay, but this is a floating point number. Okay, Python doesn't care, like it doesn't need to know what type of data that you're putting into it. Other programming languages do. Okay, but this is Python doesn't care. All right. If you wanted to say do a string, you just like the last lesson with the printing messages to the screen, strings are surrounded by double quotes. So if you wanted to put your first name, okay, then my first name is Paul, so I would put my name inside double quotes, and it would store that in that variable. Okay, and whenever you want to access those variable or that data again somewhere else in your program, right, all you have to do is refer to the variable name. Okay, so I mean, we haven't learned how to do very much so far, but what we do know is how to print things. Okay, so I can print the value of these variables after I've stored them, right, using the print command. Okay, so if I wanted to print whatever is stored in number, I could say print number. Okay, and if I run the program, okay, the flow basically goes like this. It finds the print command, it encounters a variable, right? So it goes and looks up in memory what value is stored in that variable, and it basically replaces it. Okay, it does it on its own, right? So it effectively the print statement sees this, print 27, right, and that puts it to the screen. Right? It doesn't see the variable name; it just sees the data stored in the variable. Okay, and whatever is stored in there, right, is what gets printed to the screen. Okay. So it just looks it up in memory. And you can do that for any different type. So if I wanted to print the interest rate, or if I wanted to print the my first name, okay, it just goes and looks up the data as it prints. And you can combine messages like you were in the last lesson to with the values of variables. Okay, so if instead, if you didn't want to print just the variable number, you could print a message that goes along with it, like the number. So maybe my favorite, I'll do this. So my favorite number is, okay, and then, so there's your message, my favorite number is, and then if you put a comma and the variable that you want to print out, okay, the print command knows how to deal with that. All right, so now it says my favorite number is, and then it puts 45. Okay, it automatically puts a space, okay, before and after it prints like that. Okay, so that there's a reason I didn't put a space there. Okay, it's going to do it automatically. All right, so that works for anything. Okay, so my first name is. We'll do this. First name, okay. And then if you want to print a message afterwards, you just have to separate variable names by messages with commas. Okay. And my favorite number is number. Okay. So it says my first name is Paul, my favorite number is 45. Okay. So you can just start and this will be really useful to you when we want to display the values of, say, calculations that we're doing to the screen, or any other pieces of information that the user needs to get afterwards.